Hello and welcome back to the channel, Darkness to Christ. In today's video, I'm going to be discussing why Jesus cannot be the Messiah and the Son of God or God. Now, the reason I do this video is because I discuss with Christians and I have my own theories from what I've learnt and studied and from my spiritual knowing. And there's this idea of Jesus being the Messiah and being the Son of God or being God himself incarnated and dying on the cross. But from what I've studied and from what I've learned, Jesus cannot be the Messiah and the Son of God. So it's like that saying, you can't have your cake and eat it. So certain Christians who have that philosophy, and it is the accepted philosophy within Christianity, you can't have your cake and eat it. Jesus cannot be the Messiah and the Son of God or God incarnate. And the reason I say that is because if you go back to the original reason for the Messiah, it was from the Jewish teachings of the Jews waiting for a Messiah to come into the world or to be born, and it was going to set them free from oppression, etc., etc. And the thing is the Messiah was just expected to be a man, not divine, and it had certain things that the Messiah had to meet. I've gone through that in my videos before. So if the Christians are claiming that Jesus was this prophesied Messiah, then you cannot also claim that he is God incarnate or the Son of God, because it contradicts the Old Testament. And the Christians originally who thought that Jesus was the Messiah, when he didn't fulfill the needs or the what was expected in terms of it didn't bring peace, Israel was still at war. That's why Paul made up the idea of a second coming, or said that he received a prophecy saying it wasn't fulfilled, but Jesus is going to come back. That's where the idea of the second coming came from, because Jesus, and it was recognized he didn't fulfill the prophecy during that time. So already we're starting to get contradictions and things that are not making sense. Now, when we get onto the point of view that Jesus is God and the Son of God, again, it contradicts what the Messiah was supposed to be. So let's say that you're claiming that Jesus is God or the Son of God, then you have to reject him being the Jewish Messiah. And I've spoken to Christians who believe that, and at least that makes sense, because he's either one or the other. So if you're claiming he's the Messiah, he can't be the Son of God or God. Now, if you're claiming that he's the Son of God or God incarnate, then you can't claim him to be the Messiah. And as I say, the problem with Christianity is they claim that he is the Messiah and the Son of God, but you can't do both. And the Christians, as I say, there are some Christians I speak to who claim that, yes, he is the Son of God, but he isn't the Jewish Messiah. So that's fair enough. But the general Christian view is not acceptable, or it doesn't make sense. You can't have both ways. Now, the main problem with Christianity as well is the Bible writers, or the Bible, the New Testament, claims that Jesus is the Messiah and the Son of God. So the Bible writers are actually contradicting the story as well. And that's why I reject Christianity, because it doesn't make any sense and it is completely contradictory. Now, if you're happy just believing in dogma and just saying these things like Jesus is the Messiah, Jesus is God, Jesus died for my sins, then if you're happy just believing that, then all the power to you. But true spiritual seekers who really want to know the truth are not happy with that. And when we study and things don't make sense, we try to understand it. And the interesting thing is, people accuse me, not necessarily in a bad way, but they're saying, well, hold on, you're interpreting the Bible and the Jesus stories in your own way. And that's a valid point. I accept that. But you also have to understand that I believe now, and from understanding, that Paul and a lot of the Bible writers, they were interpreting Jesus' teachings in their own way. And they come up with this idea that Jesus being God incarnate, etc., etc. Because I think, as far as I'm aware, a lot of the Bible was written decades and decades and decades after Jesus' life. Now, if you think about it, we now actually have an advantage because we've got the internet. We've got the ability to read the Bible ourselves. And we also have the ability to have understanding of other spiritual teachings. So we can say, well, does the Christian teachings match up with all the other ancient spiritual teachings? And then from there, we can come to a conclusion of like, okay, what makes the most sense? And that's what I've come to. I've learned spiritual teachings first. So I actually started in like Buddhism and Hinduism and meditation and philosophy. And then I started to learn about Jesus, and Jesus matched up with all the spiritual teachings that I learned. And then when I learned about Christianity, things started to be contradictory in terms of the Bible didn't make any sense, but what Jesus said from a spiritual point of view made sense. And that's when I realized, and I've come to the conclusion, that the Bible was just written trying to understand Jesus' teachings. And a lot of it is It's men trying to interpret spiritual wisdom through the mind rather than through the spirit. And I think that they were maybe somewhere halfway there. I think Paul and the Bible said, you know, the word killeth, but the spirit give life. So obviously he's understanding about the spirit and understanding things from a spiritual perspective. However, it doesn't take away from the fact that a lot of the Bible contradicts in terms of believing Jesus being the Messiah and the Son of God, etc., etc. Now, what is my conclusion? I personally don't believe that Jesus was the Messiah, because I don't really believe that any of those teachings are true in terms of the whole Jewish idea. I don't believe it's necessarily true at all. I also don't really believe that Jesus is God incarnate in terms of this idea that is literally God incarnate. I personally believe that he was a man who either he became enlightened or he was born with a spiritual gift or came from a higher part of the heavens. And if you want to interpret that as God incarnate, then you can do. But again, if you look at it from a spiritual point of view, we are children of God. Christ even told us that we are children of God. So, and we're made in the image of God. So we are technically God incarnate as well. And maybe that is the truth. And people accuse, say, oh, you're claiming that we're God as humans. But this is what they accuse Jesus of. If Jesus was saying these spiritual things about, you know, I am the Son of God, or I am a son of God, and they accused him of blasphemy, saying, how can you're claiming you're God? And Jesus said, does it not say in your scriptures, ye are gods? Because it says in the Old Testament scriptures, it says that you are gods in terms of humans. So Jesus was saying, well, look, it sounds to me like he was saying it's acceptable spiritual wisdom that we are gods because we are children of God. Maybe Jesus was saying, I'm not claiming to be God. I'm just saying that we are children of God. And what's happened is the Christian teachings has confused that with Jesus claiming to be God incarnate, the literal God incarnate, and this idea, which doesn't make any sense. So when you study it and come to understand everything, you can put it together and understand that Jesus was most likely a spiritual master, and maybe he came from a higher part of the heavens. But either way, I don't think it ultimately matters. The only thing that really matters is that we spiritually awaken and are born again spiritually and become a living child of God. That's personally what matters. And that's what Jesus Christ taught. And he wants us to awaken that God inside of us, and not literal God, the child of God inside of us, excuse me. See, a false teaching is to claim that we're gods, and these crazy spiritual people, the reason they're false and it's sort of new agey is that they believe that they are God incarnate. And that's what they accuse Jesus of. But the truth is we are sons of God and daughters of God, and we need to be born again spiritually, and then we'll realize that within ourselves. That's what everybody ultimately has been trying to get at. And it's got confused with people claiming, I am a God. No, you're not a God. You're a child of God. And they confused with Jesus saying, I am God, which is false. Jesus was saying, I'm a child of God. Okay, so that's my opinion. If people are upset, then I understand it, because you're just believing in a dogma and you won't accept it rather than have spiritual understanding. But at least what I say actually makes sense, whereas the Christian teaching doesn't make sense. So if you want to put forward your case, please do in the comments below. I'm interested whether you agree, you disagree, or whether you have different theories. I'm always interested in learning, because I'm evolving as well. I'm not claiming that I'm some great teacher or that I'm claiming any absolute truths as such. I'm just trying to learn, and I think my understanding is better than most people's understanding. But please comment below. I say I'm willing to learn. People have posted stuff and I've studied and thought, yeah, that makes sense. So I'm evolving more and more, as we all should be. So the usual stuff. Like the video if you like it. Comment below. God bless everyone. Goodbye.